Somewhere not far from where you are standing, a patch of vines is so heavy with pumpkins that the leaves can no longer hide them, round orange shoulders pushing up everywhere through the green, more fruit sitting in that one patch than most families buy from a store in 5 years. You are standing in the gravel lot of the seasonal pumpkin tent instead, with 3 children pulling at 3 different sleeves, and the hand-lettered sign says 50 cents a pound for the small ones and $35 and up for anything over 80 pounds. Your youngest asks again if you can get one of the really big ones this year, and you say maybe next year, same as you said last year, and hand over close to $20 for 3 ordinary pumpkins that will sit on the porch 1 week and go out with the trash before the first Monday of November. Behind you, propped against a hay bale like a trophy nobody is allowed to touch, sits last year's winner from the county way off. A pumpkin so wide across that 2 grown men needed a hand truck to move it off the scale. Every year you tell yourself that pumpkin belongs to somebody else, somebody with a greenhouse, or grant money, or 40 years behind them that you do not have. Sit with that thought for one moment, because in about 3 minutes it is not going to survive. My name is Elias. I am Amish. I have never owned a greenhouse and never entered a university trial. And this past October, Esther and I loaded a pumpkin onto a neighbor's wagon that weighed close to 400 pounds, grown from a seed packet costing less than $4, using nothing that was not already sitting behind the pole barn or in a coffee can on the summer kitchen shelf. You do not need 11 acres and an Amish upbringing to grow a pumpkin worth being proud of. You need a corner of ground, a few dollars of seed, and one thing my grandfather taught me that I have never once seen written down anywhere else. By the end of this season, you will have grown enough pumpkins to carve one for every child at your table, with a fine one left over for the fall gathering if you are of a mind to see how it measures against the neighbors. There is one sign, just one, that I will show you before we are through. The same sign my grandfather showed me on this ground, that tells you the exact week to cut a pumpkin loose from the vine without ever guessing. Most people guess, and near half guess wrong, either losing a fine pumpkin 2 weeks before Halloween or cutting one green that never finishes. If that is worth knowing before the season gets away from you, subscribe now, because I do not repeat a lesson like this one. In this video, I am going to walk you through choosing a pumpkin bread for size or one bread for the knife, feeding a vine what it actually needs once it sets fruit, training it so its strength goes into fewer and better pumpkins, and reading the 4 signs together that tell you, without guessing, exactly when to cut. You already know what that tent charges because you were just standing in it. There is no money in a seed company or a farmer teaching a family that a $4 packet of seed could grow the same pumpkin the tent sells for $35. So nobody tells you. It is not a secret. Nobody has a reason to say it, and so almost nobody does. My grandfather taught me how to know when to start, young enough that I still needed a hand climbing into the wagon. He would stand at the edge of what was then his own pumpkin patch and ask me to name the day, the actual calendar day, of that year's fall gathering. Then he had me count backward on my fingers, 4 months for the biggest varieties and a little less for the rest, and that was the day we dropped seed into the ground. Not the day the weather felt right to a boy who wanted to be outside. Not the day the neighbors started talking about their own pumpkins, the day the count told us to. A pumpkin does not care what day you feel like planting it, it only cares what day you actually did. I have kept his count every season since, and it has never once failed me, though I have failed it myself, waiting on weather that never came and paying for the mistake in October with pumpkins still holding their green. Start with the seed, because it decides more than most people want to believe. If size is what you are after, look for Atlantic Giant on the packet, named for the man in Nova Scotia who first bred the line in the 1970s. A handful of seeds runs about $4, and those same seeds are what the quiet men at the county way off grow behind their own barns every year. Given steady compost and an ordinary season, they commonly reach 300 or 400 pounds, heavy enough to want a second pair of hands and a plank ramp to move. I will be honest with you now. The pumpkins that break a ton and make the evening news come from growers tracking soil temperature by the hour, and that is not what this video teaches. What I am teaching will grow you a pumpkin worth bragging about at your own gathering, not a headline. If it is the knife you care about instead, and the faces of your own children carving on the porch, look for a variety bred plain and thick-walled for cutting, or for the table, a pie variety, smaller and sweeter, the kind Esther turns into a custard every November. Our own grandchildren claim the smallest ones every year before I have even finished the harvest, and I let them, because a porch full of lopsided, gap-toothed jack-o'-lanterns carved by small hands is worth more than any ribbon. A single vine of either kind will hand you more pumpkins than most families can use, and nothing stops you from growing both side by side, so long as each vine gets the room it asks for. Every vine, giant or plain, wants the same three things: full sun, unbroken from morning through evening, room to travel, 25 square feet and more for a single plant, because a pumpkin vine grows out, not up, further than most people plan for, and soil rich enough to eventually carry a fruit that can outweigh a grown man. Here is what most people get backward, and it costs them size every year without their knowing why. A young vine wants nitrogen first, to build leaf and stem. But once it flowers and sets fruit, it wants phosphorus for roots and flowers and potassium to move sugar into the fruit and thicken the rind. Feed heavy nitrogen straight through the season instead, and you grow the greenest vine in the county, wrapped around a pumpkin, no bigger than a volleyball. Compost handles most of this on its own, taken straight from the pile behind the pole barn, not even fully broken down, worked into the soil at planting, and again once the first flowers open. For potassium, I keep a coffee can of wood ash from the summer kitchen stove, worked into the soil once fruit is set, careful never to let it touch the stem, because ash held against green stem burns it faster than any pest would. No bagged fertilizer, no delivery truck pulling into the yard, no greenhouse heater running since April. Compost, wood ash, and patience. Once the vine is running, you have a choice to make. The first vine out of the ground is the primary vine. Anything growing directly out of that is secondary. Anything growing out of a secondary vine is tertiary, and tertiary vines rarely carry fruit worth keeping. Everyone left on the plant quietly pulls water and sugar from the fruit you actually want. I walk my patch once a week with nothing more than a pair of shears and cut every tertiary vine back to where it began. Chasing size, I go further, choosing the roundest fruit on the plant and removing every other one it tries to set, so that single fruit fills whatever room the plant would otherwise have divided between 4 or 5 smaller ones. Wanting a full patch for the children instead, I leave 2 or 3 fruits per vine and let the plant share its strength. Neither way is more correct. It depends only on what you hope to walk away with. You will meet 2 problems in most any patch, neither worth losing sleep over if caught early. Powdery mildew shows up as a pale dust on the leaves in humid weather, and squash bugs lay tidy clusters of eggs on the underside of leaves. Walk the patch weekly, press the eggs between your fingers before they hatch, and neither problem will cost you the season. It is not the frost that ruins most Halloween pumpkins. It is the day you cut it, weeks too early, and most people cut on the wrong one. Most people watch the color and nothing else. They wait for orange, and the moment it looks orange enough, they cut it loose. This is exactly where most people go wrong, because color can lie to you. A pumpkin can turn a deep, convincing orange while the inside is still finishing its work, still thin-walled and soft, still weeks from ready. The truth sits in the stem, not the skin. Where the stem meets the vine, look for what the old farmers here call corking. A green stem stays soft enough that a fingernail can dent it, still carrying sap between vine and fruit. A corked stem has gone dry, pale and hard, ridged like the bark of a tree, and a stem in that state has finished its work and stopped. That is the plain and honest sign, and unlike color, it will not lie to you. I add 2 more checks before I ever cut, because my grandfather never trusted one sign alone, and neither do I. Press a fingernail against the pumpkin, low on the side where a mark will not show. One still filling out lets your nail sink in soft. One that has finished resists almost entirely, hard as a tabletop. Then comes the oldest test of all, the one my grandfather used before either of us had heard the word corking, the one I promised you at the start of this video. Knock the pumpkin firmly with your knuckle, the same motion you would use on a door. One still filling out gives back a dull, dense sound. One that is ready gives back a hollow sound, the same you hear knocking on an empty barrel, and once you have heard that difference once, you will never mistake it again. There is a 4th sign fewer people ever learn. The detail I told you at the start, you would not find laid out with the others most places. Look at the small, curling tendril nearest, where the stem joins the vine. It stays green and springy through most of the season. Once the fruit beside it has finished, that same tendril turns brown, dry, and brittle, usually a few days before the stem itself fully corks. My grandfather taught me to check that tendril first, before ever laying a hand on the pumpkin, because it saves you the walk if the answer is already no. A corked stem, a rind that resists your nail, a hollow knock, a browned tendril. Use all 4 together, and when they agree, you are no longer guessing. You know, I want to be honest with you about timing, because false hope helps nobody. The plain truth is that if you are watching this while the days are still long, early enough that my grandfather's count leaves 4 full months before your fall gathering, you have real time to chase a true giant. Watching later than that, you can still grow a fine patch of carving and pie pumpkins, since those finish in less time, but I will not promise you a giant this year, and I would rather earn your trust on that small, honest thing than lose it on a bigger one. One more honest word. Cutting the tertiary vines decides your pumpkin size plainly every season, with no shortcut around it. The milk and the hand picking only slow problems already underway. I have never once called a method perfect when it was only good, and I am not starting now. Think back to that gravel lot, 3 children pulling at 3 sleeves, paying whatever the sign told you to pay. Nothing stopped you from growing that same pumpkin yourself except not knowing the count and the 4 signs, and not knowing that a $4 packet of seed held everything the ribbon winner on the hay bale ever had. This past October, when the wagon came around at our own fall gathering and the scale settled, mine read 4 pounds heavier than the one my neighbor Amos Fisher had been quietly proud of all season. Nothing new, I told him. Only the same count, the same compost, the same walk through the patch every week that his own grandfather most likely taught him, the same way mine taught me. It was never really about 4 pounds. It was about 2 families doing work most neighbors still assume only experts could do. Here is what I want you to do this week. Tonight, walk out to whatever ground you have and count the square feet of full sun it holds. Tomorrow, do my grandfather's count. Find the date of your community's fall gathering or Halloween itself, and count backward the months your chosen variety needs. If the count leaves room, choose your seed this weekend, giant if it allows, carving and pie if it does not. Plant shallow and inch down into soil worked through with whatever compost you have. Then walk your patch once a week, all summer, watching first for tertiary vines to cut, and later for a stem that corks, a rind that resists, a knock that hollows, and a tendril that browns. Tell me in the comments how many months your own count gives you before your fall gathering or Halloween itself, and how much sun your ground receives. I read every single one, and I will tell you honestly whether this is your season to chase a giant or a season to grow a fine patch for the children and bank the giant for next year. Next time, I want to show you what my grandmother taught me about keeping a cured pumpkin whole in the root cellar clear through to spring. long after every store-bought one has gone soft, using nothing more than a wooden shelf and the same cellar my grandfather dug by hand in 1934. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Stay watchful, stay patient. And remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just beginning to remember.